David Walsh counted days the way other people counted money. 87 days until his discharge papers came through. 87 days until he could stop wearing this uniform and start the life he had planned for 6 years. The job offer from Titan Security sat in his footlocker, already signed, already promising him more credits in a year than most colonists saw in 5. All because of the small fusion core humming quietly inside his chest, keeping him warm even in the frozen hell of Outpost Meridian that he walked the perimeter fence through knee-deep snow, his boots crunching ice that never melted. This moon had 2 seasons, cold and colder. Right now it was just cold. In a few hours, if the weather reports were right, it would get much worse. David could see the clouds building on the horizon, dark and heavy with the kind of storm that made even the veterans nervous. The refugee camp sprawled beyond the fence, a chaotic collection of emergency shelters that had grown from a temporary solution to a permanent problem. 200 families, maybe more. David had stopped counting. They kept arriving on transport ships, fleeing from wars that had nothing to do with humans but had everything to do with survival. Parents carried children wrapped in thermal blankets. Old ones leaned on younger ones. They all had the same look in their eyes, the look of people who had nowhere left to go. David had seen that look before. It reminded him of home, of the colony that failed when he was 12, of his mother choosing which children would get the working heat packs and which ones would have to share. He joined the military because someone had helped them when their generators died. Someone in a uniform had given them food and shelter and warmth. He wanted to be that person for others. But in 87 days, he would not be that person anymore. He would be a corporate security officer protecting warehouses and executive shuttles. Good pay, safe work, no more frozen moons at the edge of nowhere. Officer Reed found him near the East Gate, checking the seal on a supply container. Reed was old military, the kind who had seen too much and said too little. His face had deep lines that the cold had carved even deeper. "Storm is going to hit harder than predicted," Reed said. His breath came out in white clouds. Weather satellite shows it could last 5 days, maybe 6. David looked at the refugee shelters. They were built for temporary housing, not extended storms. Do they have enough power? For lights and basic life support? Yes. For heating? Reed shook his head. The auxiliary generators can keep them from freezing, but it will not be comfortable. Comfortable? David almost laughed. These people had watched their homes burn. Comfortable was not something they expected anymore. They just wanted to survive until tomorrow. The storm hit 3 hours later. David was in the command center when the first warnings started flashing. Wind speeds climbing, temperature dropping, visibility approaching 0. The kind of storm that could kill you in minutes if you were caught outside. Then the second alarm. The main heating generators for the auxiliary buildings had failed. Both of them. At the same time, Reed started shouting orders. Engineers grabbed tools and ran toward the generator room. David followed them, already knowing what they would find. He had grown up on a failing colony. He knew the sound of machines dying. The generators were beyond repair. Coolant leak had frozen the primary coils. The backup systems had corroded through years of minimal maintenance. The parts needed to fix them were on a supply ship that would not arrive for 5 days, maybe more because of the storm. "We can reroute emergency power," one engineer said. "Cover the critical military systems and maybe 1 or 2 of the refugee buildings." 1 or 2. Reed stared at the schematic. There are 8 buildings. Nearly 200 people. We do not have the capacity for more. Not in this storm. David watched the numbers on the screen. Power output, heat distribution, temperature projections. In 6 hours, the unheated buildings would drop below freezing. In 12 hours, people would start dying. Children first, then the elderly, then anyone whose biology could not handle extreme cold. Dr. Patel arrived in the command center with the first hypothermia case. A small child from one of the methane-breathing species, her skin already turning blue-gray. The child's name was Nira. David had seen her before, playing near the fence with other refugee children, trying to make games out of nothing. "This is just the beginning," Dr. Patel said. Her voice was steady, but her hand shook. If we cannot get heat to those buildings, I will have 50 cases by morning. Maybe more. Reed started making calls. Every nearby station, every available ship, every possible source of help. But the storm had closed everything down. No one could fly in this. No one could reach them. David walked to the refugee buildings. The families were gathering together, sharing body heat, wrapping children in layers of cloth that would not be enough. Parents made quiet decisions about who would get the warmest spots, who had the best chance that he saw near his family huddled in a corner. The child was conscious now, wrapped in everything they owned, but still shivering. Her father held her close, singing something in a language David did not understand. David's hand moved to his chest, feeling the slight warmth of the fusion core beneath his uniform. Military grade, top of the line, worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. It kept him at perfect temperature, no matter the environment. It was his ticket to that corporate job, his future, that he stood there in the freezing building, watching families try to keep each other warm, and something shifted in his mind. A thought so impossible that he tried to push it away. But it kept coming back, insistent and clear. The fusion core in his chest could power a heating system, could save these people, could cost him everything he had worked for. David turned and walked back toward the medical bay. 87 days until discharge, until his planned future began, unless he burned it first. The medical bay smelled like fear and antiseptic. Dr. Patel had cleared 3 beds for hypothermia cases, but already 5 patients lay on gurneys in the hallway. More were coming. David could hear them outside, parents carrying children who had stopped shivering. That was the dangerous stage, when the body gave up trying to stay warm. "I need to know if it is possible," David said. He stood in the doorway of Patel's office while she reviewed patient charts with shaking hands. If what is possible, she did not look up. Removing a fusion core implant, using it to power something else. Now she looked up. Her eyes went wide. "Are you insane? Do you know what you are asking?" "I know exactly what I am asking." Patel stood and closed the door. When she spoke, her voice was low and urgent. "A fusion core extraction is irreversible. Once it is out forever. Your military career ends. Your discharge benefits disappear. That corporate job you talk about, they want the implant, not you. Without it, you are just another soldier with no future." But it would work? The core could power a heating system. Theoretically, yes. A military-grade fusion core produces enough energy to run a small settlement. But David, you would be destroying your entire life for people you do not even know. Another patient arrived, a teenage boy from a species David could not identify. His breathing was shallow. Patel rushed to help. Leaving David standing in the office alone, he found Reed in the command center, staring at status screens that showed nothing but bad news. The storm was getting worse. Temperature dropping faster than predicted. Supply ships grounded for at least 6 days now. "I have an idea," David said. Reed listened without interrupting. When David finished, the older man was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "I cannot order you to do this. I will not order you to do this. It is career suicide. I'm not asking for orders, sir. I am asking if engineering can make the connection. They say it is possible. Difficult, but possible." Reed turned to face him. "David, think about what you are giving up. 6 years of service, all your benefits, that job offer, your entire future. For what? For refugees who will be gone in a few months? For people who will never be able to repay you?" David thought about Nira, her skin turning gray from cold, about her father singing to her in a language of a world that no longer existed, about parents making impossible choices in freezing buildings. "I have thought about it, sir, and I joined the military because someone helped my family when we had nothing. Someone gave us heat and food and hope. I wanted to be that person. In 87 days, I was going to stop being that person and start guarding warehouses." David met Reed's eyes. "Maybe this is who I am supposed to be." More cases arrived through the night. Dr. Patel worked without stopping, trying to warm bodies that were shutting down. David helped where he could, carrying patients, distributing thermal blankets that were not enough, watching the numbers climb. 12 hypothermia cases. Then 15. Then 20. A family lost their youngest child just before dawn. She was 4 years old. Her species could survive cold better than humans, but not this cold, not for this long. Her parents held her small body and made sounds that needed no translation. Grief was the same in every language. David left the medical bay and walked to his quarters. His discharge papers sat on the desk. 87 days. He picked up the job offer from Titan Security. The salary listed was more money than his parents had seen in their entire lives. All because of the implant in his chest. He remembered being 12 years old, huddled with his siblings in a broken-down shelter, watching his mother cry because she could not keep them all warm. He remembered the soldier who arrived with emergency generators. The man never told him his name, just set up the equipment and left. David had asked his mother why the soldier helped them. She said some people just believed in doing what was right, even when it cost them something. David put the job offer down, picked up his military tablet, sent a message to Dr. Patel. "I am ready. Let's do this." Her reply came back in seconds. "Are you absolutely certain?" "There is no going back." "I am certain. Meet me in Surgical Bay 2. I need to run some tests first." "And David, I think you are either the bravest person I know or the most foolish. Maybe both." The engineers arrived while Patel was running diagnostic scans on his implant. They looked at the readings and started calculating power conversion rates. One of them, a young tech named Amy, kept shaking her head. "This is insane," she said. "You are throwing away a fortune." "Can you make it work?" David asked. "Yes. We can route the core directly into the auxiliary power grid. It will provide enough energy to heat all 8 refugee buildings for months. But once we pull it from your chest, we need to install it within 2 hours or the core will destabilize. Then we should not waste time." Reed arrived as they were prepping the surgical bay. He pulled David aside one last time. "Last chance to change your mind. I can order you to stand down. I can make this my decision instead of yours. With respect, sir, you cannot. This is my choice. They will discharge you. Dishonorably, probably. For destruction of military property. I know. The other soldiers will think you are crazy. Let them think what they want." Reed was quiet for a moment. Then he did something David had never seen him do before. He offered his hand. David shook it. "For what it is worth," Reed said, "I could not make this choice. But I'm glad someone can." Dr. Patel called them into the surgical bay. The engineers had their equipment ready. Everything was prepared. David lay down on the table and looked at the ceiling. Somewhere in the refugee buildings, families were freezing. Children were dying. Parents were making impossible choices that in a few hours, he would have no implant, no career, and no future. But they would have heat. They would live. David closed his eyes and nodded to Dr. Patel. "Do it." Pain was supposed to be a warning system. The body's way of saying, "Stop, go back, this is wrong." David had learned that in basic training. He was learning it again now as Dr. Patel made the first incision near his heart. "I'm going to be honest with you," Patel said, her hands steady despite everything. "This procedure is not designed to be done in a field hospital with limited equipment. I'm going to hurt you. A lot. Just get it done," David said through clenched teeth. The surgical bay was crowded. Engineers stood ready with transport containers. Reed watched from the observation window. Other soldiers had heard what was happening and gathered outside, their faces pressed to the glass. Some looked impressed. Others looked like they were watching someone jump off a cliff. Patel worked carefully, cutting through layers of tissue and synthetic mesh that held the fusion core in place. Military implants were designed to be permanent. Removing one safely required specialized tools and a full surgical team. Patel had neither. "I need you to stay conscious," she said. "I need you to confirm each step. If you pass out, I have to stop. Regulations. I will not pass out. People always say that. Then they pass out." The fusion core was nestled between his ribs, connected to his cardiovascular system through a network of artificial vessels. It fed off his body's heat and produced clean energy in return. Removing it meant severing those connections one by one. Each cut sent fire through his chest. Amy, the engineer, leaned over the table. "We have maybe 2 hours once that core is out. After that, it will start breaking down. We need to install it in the heating system before the containment field collapses." "Understood," Patel said. "David, I'm about to disconnect the primary coupling. This is going to feel like someone is pulling your heart out. Because basically, that is what is happening. You need to stay with me. David gripped the sides of the table, nodded. The disconnect felt exactly like Patel described, like his heart was being ripped from his chest. He heard himself scream, but could not stop it. Every nerve ending fired at once. His vision went white. David, stay conscious. Patel's voice cut through the pain. I need verbal confirmation. Are you with me? Yes. The word came out as a gasp. Good. 3 more connections. Then we are done. Each disconnection was worse than the last. The fusion core had been part of him for 6 years. His body did not want to let it go. Neither did the small part of his brain that still believed this was insane, that he was destroying his life for strangers, that no rational person would make this choice. But rationality had never been David's strong suit. He remembered being 12 and cold and scared. He remembered the soldier who helped them. That soldier had probably been rational, probably weighed the costs and benefits. But he had helped anyway. The final connection came free. Patel lifted the fusion core out of David's chest, and for a moment, the world went dark. Cold rushed in where warmth had been. His body temperature started dropping immediately. Core is out, Patel shouted. Engineers move. Amy and her team grabbed the transport container. The fusion core glowed softly, blue-white light pulsing in a steady rhythm. They ran from the surgical bay like they were carrying a bomb, which in a way they were. Patel started closing the wound, working fast. David, can you hear me? Cold, he managed to say. So cold. That is normal. Your body is adjusting. We're going to wrap you in thermal blankets and get your temperature stabilized. She kept stitching, her hands moving with practiced precision. You did it. I cannot believe you actually did it. Outside the surgical bay, David could hear voices. Soldiers talking in hushed tones. Someone said he was crazy. Someone else said he was brave. Another voice said both could be true at the same time. Reed came in once Patel had finished the stitching. He looked at David lying on the table, wrapped in thermal blankets, shivering despite the layers. Engineering reports they have the core in position, Reed said. Connection is underway. Should know in a few minutes if it works. It will work, David said. His voice sounded weak even to himself. How do you know? Has to. I did not do this for nothing. Minutes passed like hours. David drifted in and out of consciousness, the cold making him drowsy. Patel monitored his vital signs, adjusting the thermal blankets, doing everything she could to keep his body temperature from dropping too low. Then Amy's voice came over the comm system, crackling with excitement. Connection successful. Power flowing to auxiliary grid. Heat is reaching the refugee buildings. Reed smiled. Actually smiled. David had never seen that before. You did it, Reed said quietly. They're going to live because of you. David tried to sit up, but Patel pushed him back down. You are not moving for at least 12 hours. Your body just went through major surgery. You need rest. Need to see, David said. Need to know it worked. Patel sighed. She pulled up a monitor and switched to the external cameras. The refugee buildings appeared on screen. Even through the cameras, David could see the difference. Frost was melting from windows. Doors were opening. People were stepping outside, feeling warmth for the first time in hours. He watched as Nira's family emerged from their shelter. The small child was moving now, no longer that dangerous stillness. Her father was crying, holding her close. Other families gathered in the common areas, people embracing, children laughing. Reed activated the building's comm system. Voices filtered through. Not words David could understand, but the tone was clear. Relief. Joy. Gratitude. One of the refugee leaders appeared on the medical bay's view screen. He was an older being from a species David did not recognize, but his eyes held the kind of depth that came from surviving the unsurvivable. We heard what the human soldier did, the leader said in broken English. We do not have words. We do not have way to thank, but we will remember. Always. The screen went dark. Reed stood quietly for a moment, then spoke. I have to file the official report now. Destruction of military property. Unauthorized removal of equipment. By regulations, You face dishonorable discharge and forfeiture of all benefits. I know. Was it worth it? David looked at the monitor showing families in warm buildings. Children playing instead of dying. Parents holding their young ones without fear. Yes, he said simply. It was worth everything. Patel pulled the thermal blanket higher around his shoulders. Outside, the storm continued to rage. But inside the refugee buildings, powered by the fusion core that had been beating in David's chest, families were finally warm. David closed his eyes and slept without dreaming. Recovery was boring. David had expected pain, consequences, maybe regret. What he got instead was 3 days in a medical bed watching the ceiling tiles while his body learned to regulate temperature the old-fashioned way. No implant, no artificial warmth, just biology and thermal blankets. The visitors started on day 2. First came a young mother from the refugee camp, carrying a child who could not have been more than 2 years old. She did not speak English well, but she pressed a small carving into his hand. A bird, he thought, though from no species he recognized. She touched his hand to her forehead and left without speaking. Then came an old craftsman who brought a woven bracelet made from recycled synthetic fibers. Then a teacher who offered lessons in her language. Then Nira's father, who sat beside the bed and sang the same song David had heard in the freezing shelter, except now it sounded like thanksgiving instead of grief. Nira came with him. She was small and moved carefully like someone who had been sick but was getting better. She gave David a drawing done in colored pencils someone must have found for her. It showed a planet with blue oceans and green land. Earth, based on stories David had told the refugee children during his patrols. Is pretty, she said in careful English. Like you say, want to see someday. Maybe you will, David said. She smiled and left with her father. Reed arrived that afternoon with paperwork. Official paperwork, the kind that ended careers. Discharge proceedings begin tomorrow, Reed said. He sat in the chair Nira's father had vacated. Destruction of military property. Unauthorized use of equipment. Technical violations stack up to dishonorable discharge. I expected that. The corporate job rescinded their offer. They sent a formal notice. Without the implant, you do not meet their requirements. Expected that, too. Reed was quiet for a moment. Some of the other soldiers are calling you a fool, saying you threw away your future for nothing. Others are calling you a hero. I am not sure which group is right. Does it matter to them? Probably. To you. David looked at his hands. Ordinary hands now. No fusion core humming in his chest. No guaranteed future. Just a soldier who would soon not be a soldier anymore. I made a choice, he said. People lived because of it. That matters more than what anyone calls me. Reed nodded slowly. For what it is worth, I put in my report that you saved 200 lives. That should count for something with the review board, though I would not hold my breath. After Reed left, Dr. Patel came to check his vitals. She worked in silence for a while, then spoke without looking at him. I would have made the same choice. What? If I had a fusion core implant and people were dying, I would have done what you did. I wanted you to know that, in case you start doubting yourself. She met his eyes. What you did was not crazy. It was human. The other soldiers were harder to read. Some avoided him entirely. A few nodded when they passed his bed. One young private stopped to talk, nervous and unsure. Did you really give up everything? The private asked. The job, the money, all of it. Yes. What? David thought about how to answer. How to explain that some choices were not about logic or benefits or future planning. That sometimes you just saw people suffering and knew you could stop it, and everything else became secondary. Because they needed heat, he said finally. And I had it. The private left looking confused. David did not blame him. It was a confusing thing to do. On day 4, Patel cleared him for light duty. He could not return to full active service, not without the implant, but he could walk around the base. Help where needed. The first place he went was the refugee camp. The buildings were warm now. He could feel it the moment he stepped inside. His fusion core, the one that had kept him comfortable for 6 years, was now keeping 200 people alive. Children ran through the corridors, playing games. Adults gathered in common rooms, talking and planning. The desperate edge was gone from their faces. An elderly refugee approached him. She wore layers of cloth and patterns David did not recognize, and her eyes held the kind of wisdom that came from surviving the unsurvivable. "You are the soldier," she said. Her English was better than most. "The one who gave his heart." "Not my heart, just the implant. Same thing to us." She gestured to the warm building around them. "You gave us life. We have been discussing what this means. What you have done. You do not owe me anything. We know. That makes it more important." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her robes. "We are leaving soon. Once the storm passes and ships can fly again, we go to unclaimed worlds. Try to rebuild what was lost. We want you to come with us." David stared at the paper. "I'm just a soldier. Was a soldier. I do not know anything about building settlements. You know about protection, about putting others before yourself. We need someone who understands these things." She pressed the paper into his hands. "This is not charity. We offer you a place among us, a share in what we build, a family among people who understand loss. I need to think about it, of course. But know this. What you did has already spread beyond this base. Other refugees in other camps have heard. The word is traveling. There was a human soldier who burned his future so strangers would not freeze. That story matters. That story changes how people see your kind." She left him holding the paper. Inside was a detailed proposal. Not just words, but plans. Engineering specifications for the settlements they would build. Educational systems they would create. Defense networks they would establish. They were not just surviving. They were planning to thrive. David walked through the camp for hours. People greeted him in languages he did not speak, but the meaning was clear. "Thank you. We remember. You are one of us now." He found Nira teaching younger children a game that involved tossing small stones into patterns. She saw him and waved. "David, come play." He sat with them and learned the game. It was simple, but required strategy. The children laughed when he made mistakes, corrected him patiently, treated him not like the soldier who saved them, but like a friend who was still learning their ways. That night, back in his quarters, David looked at two pieces of paper. The discharge notice from the military. The offer from the refugees. His old future was gone. The planned life, the corporate job, the comfortable existence. All of it burned away the moment Patel had lifted that fusion core from his chest. But a new future sat on his desk. Uncertain, difficult, surrounded by people who had lost everything and were trying to rebuild. People who wanted him not for what he could do with an implant, but for who he had proven himself to be. David picked up the refugee proposal and read it again, carefully. Then he pulled out his tablet and started writing a response. Outside his window, the storm was finally breaking. The worst had passed. Soon ships would fly again. Refugees would leave for their new worlds, and David Walsh, former soldier with no implant and no plan, would go with them. The discharge hearing took 15 minutes. David stood in his dress uniform, listening to charges he did not deny. Destruction of military property, unauthorized removal of equipment, violation of service protocols. The review board sat behind a long table, their faces neutral and professional. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" the senior officer asked. "No, sir. You understand these charges carry serious consequences." "Yes, sir. You do not deny any of the facts presented." "I do not deny them, sir." The board members looked at each other. One of them, a woman with gray hair and rows of medals, leaned forward. "Soldier, you threw away a valuable career for refugees who will be gone in a week. You destroyed military equipment worth more than you will earn in 10 years. You violated regulations that exist for good reasons. Can you explain why?" David thought about the question. About Nira turning gray from cold. About parents choosing which children would get the warmest spots. About a soldier years ago who helped his family when they had nothing. "People were dying, ma'am. I could stop it. So I did." The senior officer made a note on his tablet. "This hearing is concluded. You will receive our decision within 48 hours. Dismissed." David saluted and left. Reed was waiting outside. "That went well," Reed said drily. "Did it? You admitted to everything and offered no defense. So yes, by those standards, it went very well." Reed started walking toward the command center. "They will probably discharge you. Question is whether it will be dishonorable or general under honorable conditions. Does it matter? To your record? Yes. To your pension? Yes. To you? Reed shrugged. Probably not. The refugee gathering happened that evening. David had not planned to go, but Nira's father found him and insisted. The main shelter had been transformed. Makeshift decorations hung from the ceiling. Food from a dozen different cultures crowded long tables. People had put on their best clothes, which mostly meant clean versions of what they wore every day. The elderly woman who had given him the proposal stood in the center. She raised her hands for quiet, and the room fell silent. "We gather to say thank you," she said in English, then repeated it in several other languages. "To the human soldier who gave his future so we could have ours. Words are not enough, but words are what we have." One by one, people stepped forward. A teacher offered to educate any children David might have someday. An engineer promised to build him a home on their new world. A doctor pledged to care for him without cost for as long as he lived. A craftsman presented a blade forged from recycled metal, engraved with symbols David could not read, but understood meant gratitude. Nira came forward with her father. She held something wrapped in cloth. "For you," she said, "because you're a warm person, warm inside." Inside the cloth was a heating unit. Small, portable, clearly handmade from salvage parts. It would not keep him as warm as the fusion core had, but it was something given freely by people who had almost nothing. "We know you go with us," the elderly woman said, "to the new settlements. We know you accept our offer. So we make you promises. You will never be cold again. You will never be hungry. You will always have a place among us." These are not words. These are vows. The room erupted in voices, agreements in languages David did not speak but could understand. These people, who had lost homes and families and worlds, were offering him everything they had left. Not because they owed him, because he had shown them something they needed to believe in. David tried to speak, but found his throat tight. He nodded instead, accepting the gifts, accepting the promises, accepting a future he had never imagined. The next morning, a message arrived on his tablet. Not from the review board, from Titan Security, the corporation that had rescinded their job offer. "Mr. Walsh, we have reconsidered our previous decision. While you no longer meet our technical requirements for the combat division, we would like to discuss a position in our humanitarian operations department. We need people who understand sacrifice and service. We believe you might be exactly what we are looking for." David stared at the message. Good pay, better than he would have gotten in the combat role. Interesting work helping companies handle disaster response and refugee situations. Everything he thought he had lost, coming back in a different form, that he deleted the message without responding. Reed found him an hour later. "The review board has made their decision. General discharge under honorable conditions. You keep your service record. You get basic benefits. And you're free to leave when the refugees depart. That is better than I expected. The board noted that you saved 200 lives. That counted for something." Reed paused. "Also, the Refugee Council submitted a petition on your behalf, signed by every adult in the camp. That probably helped. Other opportunities kept arriving. A private security firm wanted to interview him. A news service wanted to do a story. An advocacy group wanted him to speak about refugee rights. Everywhere David turned, people were interested in the soldier who had burned his future for strangers. But David only cared about one thing. The refugee ships were coming in 3 days. He had packing to do. Patel found him in his quarters, sorting through his possessions. Most of it was military issue that he had to return. What was left fit in a single bag. "Traveling light," she observed. "Nothing to carry. You know you're giving up a lot of opportunities. The corporate job, the interviews, all of it. I know. And you're choosing to go with refugees to unclaimed worlds where you will have to build everything from scratch. No guarantees. No safety net. No easy path. I know that too." Patel sat on his bunk. "I told you I would have made the same choice. With the fusion core, I mean. But I'm not sure I would make this choice. This is different. You could stay. Build a new career here. Safe and comfortable. Safe and comfortable was never really my style. No, I suppose not." She stood to leave, then turned back. "For what it is worth, I think you are doing the right thing. The hard thing, but the right thing. Those refugees need someone like you, someone who puts people before plans. The discharge ceremony was small. Just David, Reed, and a few other officers. They handed him his papers, thanked him for his service, and that was it. 6 years of military life ended with a handshake and a signature. David walked out of the command center no longer a soldier, just a man with a bag and a promise to people who had nowhere else to go. The refugee ships arrived on schedule. 3 transport vessels, old but functional. Families boarded with everything they owned, which was not much. They were heading to a world called Haven. Unimaginative name, but appropriate. A place where maybe they could stop running. Nira found David as he was boarding. She grabbed his hand. "You really come with us?" "I really come with you." "Good. You can teach us games from Earth. And stories. And maybe fighting for when bad people come. Maybe all of those things." The ship lifted off through atmosphere cleared by the passing storm. David watched through a porthole as Outpost Meridian grew smaller. Somewhere down there, in the auxiliary power grid, his fusion core was still working, still keeping buildings warm, still saving lives. That he touched his chest where the implant used to be. No artificial warmth now, just ordinary human biology. But somehow, watching refugees laugh and plan and hope, David felt warmer than he ever had with the core installed. The elderly woman sat beside him. "No regrets." "Not one." "Good. Because ahead is hard work. Building settlements. Teaching defense. Protecting people who cannot protect themselves. It will not be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is." She smiled. "You understand us already. This will work well." The ship jumped to faster-than-light travel, leaving the frozen moon behind. Ahead lay uncertainty and struggle and a future that David could not predict. But for the first time since joining the military, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. 3 weeks after leaving Outpost Meridian, the refugee ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Haven system. David stood in the observation deck with Nira and dozens of other refugees, watching the planet grow larger on screens. Blue and green and brown, unmarked by cities or satellites. Empty, waiting, is like your Earth. Nira asked. "A little. Smaller. Different star, but similar enough. Will be our Earth now." The ships entered orbit and began scanning for suitable landing sites. The refugees had chosen this world carefully, far from the war zones. No indigenous intelligent species to displace. Atmosphere breathable for most of them, tolerable for the rest. Resources enough to build with. Water enough to drink. Hope enough to try. David had spent the 3-week journey learning. The elderly woman, whose name was Grandmother Chun in English translation, had assigned him to work with the Security Planning Committee. Not because he was an expert, but because he thought like someone who had something to protect. That was worth more than expertise, she said. The committee included refugees from 6 different species. A former police officer, a school principal, a cargo ship captain, an accountant who had survived 3 different planetary evacuations. They taught David about their cultures, their needs, their fears. He taught them about perimeter defense, emergency protocols, and how to organize people in crisis without it feeling like military control. "We are not building a fortress," Grandmother Chun had explained during one meeting. "We are building a home that can defend itself." There is a difference. David was learning to see that difference. The landing site was chosen by consensus. A river valley with good soil, moderate climate, and natural barriers on 3 sides. The ships descended through atmosphere, landing in a triangle formation around what would become the settlement's central plaza. The first day was chaos. Organized chaos, but chaos nonetheless. Shelters had to be erected. Water sources verified. Power systems established. Food distribution organized. Medical facilities set up. Every refugee had a role, even the children. Especially the children. They were the future this place was being built for. David found himself everywhere at once. Helping engineers position solar collectors, teaching families how to seal their shelters against wind and rain, working with the medical team to set up a triage system in case of emergency. Not because he was in charge, but because he could not help himself. Protection was what he knew. Service was who he was. Near his father, a man named Tomas, worked alongside him on the third day, building a communal kitchen from prefabricated panels. You move like soldier, Tomas observed, but you're not soldier anymore. Hard habit to break is good habit. We need someone who thinks of protection. But David, you must remember, you're not here to guard us. You're here with us, part of us. Understand? David stopped working and looked at the settlement taking shape around them. Families laughing as they struggled with unfamiliar tools. Children playing in dirt that would soon be gardens. People from a dozen different worlds working together because they had no choice and because maybe they wanted to. Understand. The first crisis came on day 7. A storm rolled in from the western mountains, faster and stronger than predicted. Wind tore at the temporary shelters. Rain flooded the lower sections. Lightning struck near the power grid, causing a cascade failure. David found himself coordinating the response without even thinking about it. Moving people to stable structures, redirecting water flow, organizing teams to protect the most vulnerable. Not ordering, suggesting, asking, working alongside everyone else. When the storm passed, Grandmother Chun found him checking on families in the emergency shelter. You did well, she said. Led without leading. Protected without controlling. This is what we need. I just did what made sense. Exactly. What makes sense to you is what we need to survive. News from the wider galaxy filtered in through long-range communications. The war that had displaced these refugees was spreading. More worlds falling. More people fleeing. But there was other news too. Small stories getting shared across refugee networks that a human soldier had given up everything to save people he did not know. Just given his future away like it meant nothing, like their lives meant more. The story was traveling, getting embellished, probably, but the core was true. Other refugee groups were talking about it. Some humans are like this, they said. Some humans put others first, even strangers, even when it cost them everything. It was changing conversations, changing how human offers of help were received. One soldier's choice, rippling outward. David heard about it from a communications technician who monitored the networks. They talk about you, the text said. The soldier who burned his future. Some think it is myth. Others know it is real. Either way, it matters. I did not do it for recognition. No, that is why it matters. On day 15, the fusion core from Outpost Meridian finally failed. David heard about it through military channels. The core had lasted longer than expected, kept the refugee buildings warm through 2 more storms, then quietly shut down as its containment field degraded beyond function. The buildings had other heat sources by then. The refugees who stayed behind were safe. David thought about the core, about the 6 years it had hummed in his chest, about the weeks it had saved lives after leaving him. Some things burned out. That was their nature. The question was what they illuminated while they still had light. The settlement grew. Houses replaced shelters. Gardens produced food. Schools opened for the children. Defense systems were established, not military grade, but good enough. David trained volunteers in basic security, emphasizing de-escalation over confrontation. They were protectors, not soldiers. The distinction mattered. Nira excelled in her schooling. She had a gift for languages and spent hours teaching David phrases in her native tongue. She also appointed herself as guide to refugee culture, explaining customs he would have misunderstood, introducing him to families he might not have met otherwise. You are terrible at being refugee, she told him one day. You work too much. Never rest. Never celebrate. I celebrate. You stand in corner parties. Is not celebrating. She was right. David had never been good at rest, but Nira made him try, made him sit through long dinners where he could not understand half the conversation, made him learn dances from cultures that had no equivalent on Earth, made him part of something larger than duty. 6 months after landing, the Settlement Council made it official. David Walsh was appointed head of community safety, not a military position, not law enforcement, something different. Someone who thought about protection the way a parent thought about children. With care, with patience, with the understanding that safety came from community, not walls, the appointment came with a home. Small but well-built, positioned near the central plaza so he could respond quickly to emergencies. Near his family lived 3 houses away. Grandmother Chun was just across the path. He was surrounded by people who had once been refugees and were now neighbors. Family, in the broader sense, that on the 1-year anniversary of landing, the settlement held a celebration. Real food from real gardens. Music from a dozen cultures blending into something new. Children running between houses that had not existed a year ago. Adults making plans for the next year, the next decade, the next generation. David stood at the edge of the plaza, watching. Tomas found him there. Still standing in corners, Tomas said with a smile. Old habits. Cool, me. Dance with us. You're part of this. You helped build it. David let himself be pulled into the celebration. Danced badly. Ate food he could not identify. Listened to stories and languages he was still learning. And, somewhere in the middle of it all, he realized something, that he was happy. Not the distant contentment of a planned future, but the immediate warmth of being exactly where he belonged. Later that night, lying in his small house listening to the sounds of the settlement sleeping, David thought about the fusion core, about the choice he had made in a frozen medical bay on a distant moon, about the future he had burned. That future would have been comfortable, safe, profitable, everything he thought he wanted. This future was uncertain, difficult, built from nothing in a place far from everything he had known. But this future had Nira teaching him her language, had Grandmother Chun asking his advice on matters that had nothing to do with security, had Tomas inviting him to family dinners, had 200 families who looked at him and saw not a soldier or a savior, but simply one of them. Somewhere in the galaxy, on a frozen moon at the edge of human space, the buildings his fusion core had warmed still stood. Empty now, waiting for the next wave of refugees, the next crisis, the next need, but the warmth remained. In the people who had survived, in the story that spread, in the small ripples that became larger waves, changing how humans were seen by those who had lost everything. David closed his eyes and slept without dreaming. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, problems to solve, people to protect, a community to serve. But tonight, in a house in a world called Haven, surrounded by people who had nowhere else to go and everywhere yet to build, David Walsh was home. Some futures had to burn to light the way for others. His had burned bright enough to see by, and what remained was enough.